PragerU, the conservative YouTube channel that likes to call itself a university, recently published a video titled "Would a Flat Tax Be More Fair?" In the video, their commentator Steve Forbes explains why he believes the American economy would benefit from a system of taxation where everybody, regardless of how much money they make, pays the exact same percentage of their income in taxes. I personally think that the video was pretty bad, and that Forbes bases a lot of his argumentation on incredibly flimsy evidence and bad math. However, when I checked out the comment section on the video, I found that the overwhelming majority of people there supported Steve Forbes and believed a flat tax would be better. So I decided I'd make a video breaking down and dissecting some of the arguments Forbes uses to support his case, and hopefully shine light on an issue that I think is pretty prevalent in a lot of PragerU videos.
The American Revolution started as a tax revolt over a single tax on tea.
Here Stephen is using the example of the Boston Tea Party to explain that Americans have always hated taxes. However, I think there's still a couple of big issues with this example. First, the Boston Tea Party did not start the American Revolution. If he's talking about the Revolutionary War, that didn't happen until 2 years after. If he's talking about things that led up to the Revolutionary War, I would argue that things like the Stamp Act were already putting in place the foundation for the Revolutionary War to occur nearly a decade before the Boston Tea Party happened. The second issue with using the Boston Tea Party as an example of why America hates taxes is because the early movements against British taxation were more to do with the lack of representation we were receiving in the British Parliament than the taxes that they were levying against America. The movement was not called No Taxation, the movement was called No Taxation Without Representation. It was called that because Americans were more upset with the lack of representation they were given while paying taxes to the British government than the taxes themselves. If colonial-era America really hated taxes as much as Steve Forbes would have you believe, they probably wouldn't have included Article 1, Section 8, Clause 1 of the U.S. Constitution when they wrote it just a few years later, which reads, "The Congress shall have the power to lay and collect taxes, duties, imposts, and excises to pay the debts and provide for the common defense and general welfare of the United States." After this bad example, Steve goes on to explain that the American tax system has only gotten worse and worse, and that right now it is absolutely terrible, furthering that
nothing illustrates the disaster that our tax system has become than the mother of all taxes, the federal income tax code.
Forbes backs up this pretty big claim by explaining that it's bad because there are 10 million words in the federal income tax, and because it's so confusing that American families often don't know how much money they owe in taxes. As a result, Forbes explains that every year hundreds of billions of dollars are wasted by Americans trying to figure out how much money they owe in taxes, and that this money could better be used to, among other things, solve diseases.
These are annual costs, as in every year. That's a lot of money that could be used in more productive ways, creating new products, new services, new medical devices, new cures for diseases.
After a cute little animation in which Steve Forbes stabs to death a green monster meant to represent the current tax system, he proposes his own solution, claiming that
the best solution is the most simple. A single flat tax with no deductions, except for a deduction for each adult and for each child.
Now here's where we get into the major problems with this video and the argument that it's making, and that is that a flat tax in America is simply unfeasible. One of the most contradictory claims the right likes to throw around with regards to a flat tax is that simultaneously a flat tax would allow everybody to pay less in taxes and at the same time generate more tax revenue for the federal government. Steve Forbes even says that in this video. First, he makes the claim that
everyone would pay less, not only in taxes, but also in compliance.
But then, Steve also makes this claim.
And irony of ironies, ultimately generate more revenue for government.
Now, if you've done any math at all, the issue should be pretty clear at this point. How can you simultaneously say that everybody is going to give less money to the government, but then at the same time argue that the government is going to make more money from taxes? Later on, Steve actually gives us a number, explaining that his flat tax is going to be 17%, which allows us to actually run the numbers and do the math, and I promise you it doesn't add up at all. Let's start off with this claim that everybody would pay less, because it makes absolutely no sense. A few years ago, an article published by CNBC uncovered that individuals living in the bottom fifth of income in the United States pay about 2% of their income in taxes every single year. Putting in place a 17% tax rate for everybody would multiply the amount that the poorest fifth have to pay by 8. whilst at the same time cutting in half the amount that the top 1% is forced to pay right now. What's more is that the average American earns about $33,000 a year, putting them into the second tax bracket of people earning between $10,000 and $40,000, meaning that right now they pay 12% of their income in taxes. What that means is that his 17% flat tax would not only increase the amount that very poor people have to pay, but it would increase the amount that the average American has to pay. At that point, more than half of the country is going to pay more money in taxes under his tax plan than they do right now, further calling into question his belief that everybody would pay less. Now we get to what is probably the biggest issue in the entire video, and that is Steve Forbes' plan for the poor and lower income households. Steve explains it like this.
Under this plan, a family of four who makes less than $52,800 would pay no income tax.
Now this presents two gigantic problems with his argument. The first is that because of things like familial income distribution, this means that practically 40% of all US households would just be paying no taxes, which would create a massive deficit for the federal government. The second issue, however, might be the biggest in the entire video, and that is that at this point, Steve Forbes is not arguing for a flat tax rate anymore. As Steve has explained time and time again throughout this video, a flat tax system is one in which everybody, regardless of how much money they're making, pays the exact same amount in taxes. However, if Steve now starts advocating for a system wherein families earning more than $52,000 a year pay a different tax rate than families earning less than $52,000 a year, he's no longer arguing for a flat tax system. This is by definition a progressive tax system where families earning less money pay less taxes. In this case, it's 0% for families earning less than $52,000 and 17% for families earning more than $52,000. He's not eliminating tax brackets, he's just reducing the amount of them to 2. Now, I suppose this issue on its own is not that big a problem, except for the fact that he spends 30 seconds of this video explaining why you can never have more than one tax bracket, because if you have 2, then you'll end up with 4, and if you end up with 4, you'll end up with 7, and they will multiply and multiply and multiply and multiply.
This single rate is absolutely critical. Whenever we have 2 or more tax rates, they're like rabbits. They breed. We saw that with the 1986 tax reforms, which consisted of 2 rates. They've since multiplied into the 7 we have today.
So does PragerU's Steve Forbes know what he's talking about when it comes to taxation in America? I personally don't think so. But if you disagree, please feel free to let me know.